The conference hall is colder at the edges. I sit in the last row and watch the stage breathe. Light spills across the screen and turns the dust in the air into soft glitter. The host clears his throat, the music fades, and Conrad Hale walks out with a smile that has moved more money than a small port city. He says we are here for a leap. He says Atlas X will change how cargo thinks and how routes behave. The screen behind him brightens again. A diagram appears. I know the lines before I see them. There is a circle of feedback near the center, faint and almost shy. There is a cluster of adaptive modules shaped like little cells. Thin arrows cross one another and meet at a switching gate that monitors the flow of events. It looks almost like something I once drew on a coffee sleeve on a rain night when the building vents made the windows hum. I remember the way the ink bled when the sleeve took a drop of water. I remember smoothing it flat on my desk and translating it into working code. In this room, the diagram is perfect and clean, and my name is nowhere near it. Applause rolls up the walls like surf against a seawall. Conrad laughs with the crowd and points toward the future. A young engineer at the mic asks who led the architecture work. Conrad says it was a cross-functional effort and that key decisions were taken at the executive level to ensure alignment. His gaze sweeps the hall as if he is searching for someone he has already decided not to see. I stand, slide my notebook into my bag, and leave before the next question lands. The corridor outside smells like floor polish and sea air. It is a smell that belongs to glass towers on the water. I ride the elevator alone to the lab floor and swipe my badge one last time. The room is a sea of gray chairs and monitors with towers of printouts tucked under coffee mugs. My desk looks the same as always. Neat, unremarkable. The kind of place where work gets done and no one takes pictures. I wake my station and watch the login prompt receive me like a door that still remembers my key. I type 3 lines into a private note. Not a paragraph, just 3 items. Clear drafts. Export personal proofs. Do not forget the bottle. The bottle is a stainless steel thing with a narrow neck and a dent from when it fell from a testing rack last winter. I unscrew it, sip what is left of the morning coffee, and set it aside. Then I call up the terminal. Commands scroll like a known prayer. I remove my development containers. I scrub temporary caches. I wipe credentials for services that belong to the company and never belong to me. My keystrokes sound like small stones ticking down a metal chute. I am careful. I am slow where slowness matters. I keep a record on an external device that is mine and not on the network. Every step receives a timestamp. Every timestamp knows its own proof. The habit started years ago because I hated arguments. A record is a conversation that never raises its voice. A small console window flickers open on the far monitor. It is the one I use when I run audits on my own builds. The words are pale gray, almost the color of the background. Audit trail warming up, it says. The line blinks once and then disappears. No one else would notice it. A colleague leans across the gap between our desks and asks if I have an extra power adapter. I tell him I need a stable source for a minute because some things listen even when we are quiet. He laughs, thinks I am making a joke, and moves on. I close processes one by one and then hover my cursor over a service that sits very low in the stack. It is light, almost weightless. It watches without writing. It has one job that is simple and relentless. It keeps a sentinel at the door of a decision. I pause it. The system tray chirps. Sentinel paused. I read the words like a goodbye. My laptop fan slows, as if it can also feel the drop in temperature. At 5:47 in the afternoon, I log out and the workstation shows me the default background for employees who never change their theme. My reflection is a dim shape on the black glass. On the desk, I leave a ring of coffee and nothing else. I zip my bag, pick up the bottle, and walk to the elevator. No email to the team. No farewell note in the group chat that turns everything into confetti. People think others will miss them if they write a good last message. I do not need to be missed. I need to move. The lobby doors inhale the warm evening and exhale the smell of the bay. I cross to the tram and let the card reader take a breath of my badge. The city outside is orange gold and metal blue. The rails hum. The carriage sways. I take the second laptop from my bag and rest it on my knees. It is dark gray and carries no sticker. Inside it is a small company that is older than its papers. Inside it is another set of papers that are older than the slides. Inside it lives a system that greets me like a cat that still pretends it is wild. Colonel wakes with a river of logs. It does not try to perform magic. It writes a plan, tests the plan, measures what moved, and then rewrites itself when the measures say try again. It does not need applause. It needs current. I read the lines while the carriage shakes the light into long bars against the floor. Routes form and vanish in my head like tide maps. I remember the first night Colonel did not crash. The air had smelled like warm dust and ozone. Outside the window, a gust of rain had smudged the world into soft charcoal and mirror. I watched a simulation move a web of containers through a storm with the grace of a hand that knows where all its fingers are. I knew then what I was building. I also knew who would try to stand under the screen when it was time to show it. My phone taps the table with soft notifications. Corporate chat floods with photos of the launch. A string of congratulations climbs the screen. A former teammate sends me little paper rocket icons. I type nothing. Silence is the longest sentence when the other person knows how to read. The tram surfaces and the bay returns to view, copper and glass. I step off and walk to my apartment with the laptop snug in the bag and the bottle clinking gently against the zipper. My building is quiet. In the kitchen, I wash the bottle, pour out the cold coffee, and set water on the stove. Then I sit at the table and open the folder that holds every proof of independent development that matters. Source fragments, build hashes, screens of early tests with timestamps that point to nights and mornings, and a few strange hours when time feels flat. Witness notes from 2 peers who checked my work on days that belong to their calendars as much as mine. It is not a weapon. It is a map that can be handed to a judge who prefers maps over stories. There is an email thread from counsel at a firm that does not put extra words where no words are needed. I read their draft. It is the kind of letter that does not thump the table. It simply slides a set of facts into a ray of light and invites the other side to look at them one by one. The sender field is Northglass Analytics. My name is nowhere near the subject line and should not be. This is not about me as a person. It is about provenance as something that can be proved without loud voices. The next morning I wake before the sky decides what color it wants to be. Water runs in the pipes above my ceiling. The city yawns and remembers it has work to do. I dress in a dark jacket and low shoes and take a car across the bridge to the Meridian Tower. The building holds its breath like a swimmer at the edge of a dive. The guard hands me a visitor tag with my first and last name spelled right. That always feels like the first small test. The elevator opens into a lobby where the floor is black stone and the windows burn with daylight. A receptionist walks me to a room that faces the bay. Ships move like punctuation marks on the water. The desk is clean, the chairs look unkind, and the display on the wall waits with a black glass stare. The door opens and the chief technology officer of Meridian steps in with 2 engineers who look both curious and cautious. He tells me we have 15 minutes. I tell him that 14 will be enough and the last minute is for his choice. I do not open slides. Slides are theater. I open a terminal and a dashboard. Numbers fill the screen. Event throughput in the last 10 seconds. Median latency against the baseline. Energy draw per unit of processing across the pipeline. I speak without lifting my eyes. I do not sell, I measure. The first engineer crosses his arms and then uncrosses them. The second leans forward. The CTO checks his watch and then forgets it. I turn the simulation on. Colonel ingests weather data in real time and marks a change in a wind field with a gentle pulse like a heartbeat. 3 routes shift to new corridors and the dashboards tilt in our favor. A small light in the corner blinks for a second. The ethics monitor has sensed noise creeping into one of the feeds. The CTO points at it and asks what that light means. I call it a demanding friend. I say we will talk about it in a moment. He smiles without showing his teeth. That is the look of a person who already suspects the real demonstration is not the one they were told to expect. I let the system run for another minute. Then I bring up the panel that tracks the chain of reasons behind every recommendation in the last hour. The room gets very quiet. You can hear quiet change shape when an idea walks in and sits down. The chain shows where the data came from, how reliable it is in this window, which models are voting, which votes are moving toward the threshold, and why a vote flips when it flips. The monitor that blinked a moment ago now holds a note that says the wind field source has lost reliability, and the system has moved to a backup model trained on a different coastal region with an adjustment applied. I do not say that no one at Arcturus saw this tool running like this. I do not say that it took me months to make it feel natural. I only say that when a machine is going to move ships and money and people, it should be able to show its work. The CTO asks what I want. I say I want a quiet space for the next week, 2 engineers who can listen and argue well, a small group of clients who will let us test on shadow traffic, and a legal team that keeps its pens capped while the code is still learning to sing. He asks what I want after that. I say I want an attribution pipeline that is mandatory and visible and persistent across every shared project. I say I want a process, not an apology. I say it the way I would say I want a cup of water. Calm, non-negotiable, ordinary. He looks at the engineers. They both nod. He checks the clock again and then shuts the laptop in front of him like a man closing a door on a draft of cold air. We should take another 30 minutes, he says. I agree. I do not smile. I always save the smile for the moment when code does something kind for me that I did not teach it to do. By the time I leave Meridian, the sun has decided to burn. I walk past a small cafe with a row of bright bottles lined like tiny lighthouses. I think about my old bottle at home and the dent that will never come out. I think about how easy it is to keep small broken things because they feel familiar. I think about how easy it is to throw away work because someone else wants to stand under the light. The city smells like salt and engines and lemon cleaner. It smells like the start of a day that does not pretend. I return to my apartment and make a fresh pot of coffee. I sit at the table and let the steam fog the top of my screen for a second. Then I open my mail. The meeting block at Meridian stretches itself from 15 minutes to 45. The invite adds 3 names and a room number on a higher floor. I breathe out. The air leaves my lungs like I have just crossed a narrow patch of cold water without looking down. I read the draft from counsel one more time and then send it. The subject line is concise and sober. The letter does not accuse. It simply places a coin of truth on the table and asks if the other party can hear the sound it makes when it lands. That evening, the city lights up in squares and stripes. I lower the blinds, and the room grows soft around the edges. I set Kernel to run an overnight test and watch the little traces stream by. The system writes notes to itself in a voice no one will ever hear. I close the lid and see my face in the dark screen and the faint glow beyond it. I do not think about Conrad. I think about the way good infrastructure turns conflict into protocol. I think about how a microphone is only powerful if a room believes in it. I think about doors that open because a key fits, not because someone decides you may pass. In bed, I listen to the building breathe. Somewhere a pipe knocks and then quiets. A gull cries once, twice, and goes wherever gulls go at night. Sleep arrives like a tide that has learned my street. In another building across the bay, someone is writing a press release that uses the word innovation so many times it forgets what the word means. In this room, there is only a dented bottle drying on a rack, a laptop with a black screen, and a stack of records that could speak for me if I chose not to say a thing. Morning again. The elevator at Meridian opens and closes for a different set of suits. The inbox at Northglass shows a note from a client who wants to see the system in action on the weekend. News sites run fast little pieces with headlines that sparkle and then dissolve. A ticker I do not control shows a curve that is starting to wobble. In the lab at Arcturus, a junior lawyer will soon ask what a mirror log is and why it keeps pushing drafts to a place no one remembers authorizing. But that is for another chapter. Today is a simple list. Clear drafts. Export personal proofs. Do not forget the bottle. I raise it, drink, and set it down with a soft click that sounds to me like a new habit starting. I take one more look at the terminal before I go. The console in the corner breathes, and then the pale words appear once again and fade. Audit trail warming up. I close the window. My hand rests for a moment on the trackpad. I tell myself quietly that the work is not to win a story. The work is to make a system where stories cannot steal from each other without leaving a mark. The sea outside looks still from here, but I know the current is busy under the skin. I pick up my bag and step out into the hall. The day has the patience of a long game. So do I. The Meridian Tower has a way of making the bay look nearer than it is. From the glass wall of the waiting room, I can see the cranes at the docks like tall metal herons. A tugboat draws a slow line across the water. I press my visitor badge against my jacket to stop it from tapping when I walk. The receptionist signals, and I follow a short corridor that smells like cold stone after rain. The conference room waits with its black glass screen and a table that could seat a dozen decisions. I place my laptop at the far end, where the sunlight does not glare, and plug in the single cable that carries both power and a promise. The door opens. The chief technology officer steps in with 2 engineers and a counsel who moves like someone who counts time in billable minutes. He introduces each of them. I repeat their names in my head so I will not need to ask again. We shake hands and sit. He glances at the room clock and says we have 15 minutes. I tell him 14 will do, and I will leave 1 minute for his choice. I begin without slides. Slides create a theater, and today we are building a workshop. I open a terminal and a dashboard. Traffic pours into the charts like a river poured into a new bed. The numbers look clean because the pipes that feed them are clean. I speak with the cadence of someone reading a tide table. Event throughput. Latency at the 50th percentile and at the 95th. The cost of energy per 1,000 operations. The second engineer leans forward. The first rests a knee against the table and tries not to nod. I ask for permission to use a live weather feed from a public source so that I am not hiding behind a perfectly behaved test set. The CTO says go ahead. Kernel ingests the data and settles into a rhythm. On the right side of the wall, a small panel shows a map of routes across the region. Ships are dots. Dots become tiny arrows as momentum comes into play. A patch of wind in the upper corner shifts by a few degrees. The edges of 3 corridors lighten and 2 others darken. Arrows ease into new lanes as if a steady hand had nudged them. The energy draw graph dips. The cost curve smiles a little. No one speaks for 5 breaths. I narrate what is happening. Kernel is not guessing. It makes a plan, tests a small piece of that plan, and if the result is acceptable, it expands the change across the surface of the system. If the result is not acceptable, it retreats and picks a neighbor to test. It does this at a speed that feels like intuition but is not. It looks like magic when you are far away. It looks like bookkeeping when you are up close. Bookkeeping is what saves cargo when a storm arrives faster than a radio call. A tiny light in the lower corner of the dashboard blinks. It blinks only once. The ethics monitor has felt a tremor in the weather feed. The council lifts a pen but does not write yet. The CTO points a finger in a small motion and asks what that tiny light stands for. I say it belongs to a demanding friend. I say I will come back to it after we answer the ordinary questions about performance. He nods and does not press. He's used to being in rooms where people sell him noise. He is testing whether I will keep my promise to come back. We run a second scenario. This one introduces a delay at a major interchange and a spike in unpredictable truck availability for inland legs. The arrows pause, circle, and then resolve into a new choreography. Median delay falls after a brief rise. The energy draw holds steady. The demand forecast shifts emphasis to 2 ports that can absorb early arrivals without paying a premium. The engineers forget to be cautious and start talking over one another. How are the votes tallied among the models? What is the cooling plan for the data center if the graphs suggest we can pack more processing into fewer machines? How often does the system archive its own explanations so a regulator can review them later without a team of translators? I answer in full sentences and short numbers. I describe the way Kernel uses a chain of reasons that points to its assumptions before it points to its results. The light in the corner blinks again. The weather feed has begun coming in with a pattern that suggests a network problem upstream. I raise a hand and let the room quiet itself. This is the part that matters more than cost or speed. I press a key and bring up the panel that until now has lived behind the performance graphs. The new panel is not pretty, and I like that. It looks like a ledger with rows that breathe. For each recommendation, you can see the source of the data, the trust we assign to that source in this window, the models that are voting, the current weight each vote carries, the reason a vote moved if it moved, and a brief paragraph that reads like notes you could show to a regulator who only has an afternoon. The council is the first to speak. She asks if the narrative text is generated at the time of the decision or after. At the time, I answer. She asks if the narrative includes any fields that cannot be audited because they are based on proprietary signals. No, I answer. The proprietary part lives in the way the system learns which tests to run next, not in the reasons it gives for the choices it makes. The second engineer asks if the dark corner on the reliability chart for the wind field is a known issue with that feed. I say it happens when the upstream service loses a satellite for a few minutes and fills with an estimator that is fine for human eyes but too soft for direct routing. The CTO asks if the backup model can be set to take over only on this coast or whether it will push a global change. I say it can localize and we can show our work when we do it. We watch the ledger for another minute. The weather panel notes a reduced reliability score and the system shifts to a backup model trained on a different coastline. It lists the adjustment factor and the citation for the data source. It marks the moment as a change that requires human review if the condition persists longer than a given window. I step back from the screen and let the room hear the quiet. Quiet grows a second set of lungs when people realize they are looking at a thing that answers the question they had not known how to ask. The CTO closes his notebook slowly. He looks at me and asks what I need during a pilot. I say I need a quiet room, 2 engineers who argue well, a connection to a subset of traffic so we can run shadow tests, and a legal team that does not pressure the work while it is still finding its posture. He asks what I require after we know the system works in their context. I say I require an attribution pipeline that is visible and mandatory across all shared projects. I say I do not want an apology. I want a process that makes apologies unnecessary. I feel the counsel turn her head to see if I am making a rhetorical point. I am not making a rhetorical point. I am reading a requirement. The CTO taps the table once with his pen and then stops. He says we should extend our meeting by 30 minutes. The receptionist returns with water and leaves without a sound. I switch to a data set from a different coast to show that the backup model used a moment ago is not a simple clone. It is a neighbor who speaks with a slight accent, and the ledger records this accent so we know when we are trusting a cousin to speak for us. We take questions from the engineers. They want to know what happens when one model becomes too sure of itself. I show them how kernel reduces the weight of a model that has not been tested against fresh ground in a given window. They want to know what happens to explanations when 2 models disagree, but both win on different metrics. I show them how the ledger records the split and how a human can request a tiebreaker that has to pass a higher bar and log the reason it was used. They want to know how hard it is to port the system to hardware they already own. I show them the footprint and a rough plan for a first week. Near the end of the extended time, the counsel asks a question that does not hide its teeth. If Atlas X claims a similar architecture, how do we know this is not the same work dressed in a new jacket? I do not flinch. I open a folder and lay out a timeline that includes early prototypes, build hashes, test records, and witness notes. The dates speak without raising their voice. The patterns are older than the brand name that was spoken in the hall yesterday. I do not say the name. I let the papers hold the floor. The CTO thanks me and asks for a day to consider next steps. I gather my cable and close the lid. The second engineer walks me to the elevator and asks if the ledger view we saw is the complete thing or a smaller slice for the sake of the demo. I tell him it is the real view and that I do not show toys when work is at stake. He says that is refreshing. I say honesty is cheaper than maintenance. He laughs once under his breath and steps out of the elevator before the doors close. I sit in the lobby for a minute and read the draft letter on my phone. Northglass will send it in an hour. The subject line is calm. The body contains a small set of statements with references. It does not accuse. It does not threaten. It invites the recipient to look at a set of facts under a light that will not flicker when someone waves a hand in front of it. I send my approval and put the phone away. Outside, the wind has shifted. The flags on the plaza point toward the bridge. I cross the street to a small shop and order tea to go. The cup warms my palm, and I think about how a system earns trust. Not by promising perfection, and not by hiding its doubts. It earns trust by keeping a log of the questions it asks itself and letting others read those questions without having to beg. I think about the junior engineers who will learn faster because they can see the chain of reasons instead of staring at a black box that only says yes or no. Back at my apartment, I open the door and place the bottle on the counter. The dent catches the light like a scar that took a long time to accept. I make new coffee and sit with the laptop in the quiet that comes after a day that did not pretend. The inbox fills with short messages. Thank you for the demo. We would like to try a small pilot. Can you join a call tomorrow? My reply is simple. Yes. Send 3 time slots. Include the names of the people who will be there and the data sets you want me to use. The letter from Northglass goes out while I am rinsing the filter. I can tell by the soft chime in the corner of the screen. A copy arrives for my records. The language is careful and clean. It notes the existence of independent development and proof of dates. It asks for a pause before any further public claims overlap with what we have shown. It suggests a conversation among counsel so that the parties can avoid unnecessary noise. It does not mention my name. It does not need to. Night comes with a few clouds that look like crumpled sheets laid across the sky. I set kernel to run a long test and watch the lines march down the console like small, proud soldiers on a quiet street. In the corner, the audit trail breathes and then writes a single line that means I will be able to sleep. The building murmurs. The bay sends a low voice through the open window. I think about power that does not require a stage and about credit that does not need a poster with a name in large type. I think about the door we opened today and the way the hinges did not squeak. Before sleep, I check one more time the little light that had blinked in the demo. The ethics monitor records that the weather feed returned to normal reliability and that the backup model yielded the floor with a note. The ledger stores the exchange. A regulator could read it next month and understand it. An engineer could read it tomorrow and learn from it. A manager could read it next year and remember why we do this in the first place. I close the lid. The room becomes a soft square in the middle of a tall building that goes silent by degrees. There is nothing left to say tonight. The work is speaking just fine. Morning breaks like a screen warming from black to a deep blue. I wake before the alarm and sit with my coffee in both hands while the kettle clicks as it cools. The city has a different sound when you are about to test a promise. It feels like the moment a musician lifts a bow and waits for the room to finish breathing. I open the laptop and the day pours in. News feeds march across my screen with the steady cadence of a metronome. Short articles, fast graphics, words that glitter and words that fade. The headlines pair the name of the company I left with phrases that sound like tides turning. Analysts use expressions that look measured and polite. The curve in the corner of a financial dashboard begins to wobble in a way that a sailor would understand. I close the window before my mind starts to chase numbers that I do not control. The phone vibrates with calendar blocks from Meridian. 3 clients have accepted a shadow pilot. The first is a port operator on the north side of the bay. The second is a cold chain distributor with a reputation for schedules that cut minutes into halves. The third is a trucking cooperative that can flex capacity without breaking itself. I confirm each slot and ask for a narrow set of routes so that we can compare cleanly with their current systems. I add one note that will matter later. Please arrange a place where we can review ledger entries without breaking the flow of the day. I pack the laptop and a small notebook and the bottle that now carries only water. On my way out, I pause at the small frame that has been face down next to the door for months. I turn it over. The little Polaroid shows a map that looks nothing like the final interface. The photo is grainy and the lines are crooked because my hand had been shaking from too much coffee on too little sleep. The date in the white margin sits like a quiet witness. I put the frame in my bag. I do not plan to show it. I just want to remember the look of a thing when it is still mostly courage. At the port, the air tastes like iron and salt. A gull tries to land on the edge of a container and changes its mind at the last second. I shake hands with a manager who has the calm tone of a person who has walked through storms without losing a hat. We set up in a narrow room that looks out over the cranes. A stack of binders leans like a small cliff against the wall. I plug in and connect to a duplicated stream of traffic. Colonel settles into a posture I recognize. Stable, awake, curious. We watch a live route set for a cluster of outbound ships. The standard planner inside their current system makes a choice that seems fine. Colonel tests a nearby alternative in a tiny controlled patch. The measured delay drops by a sliver and the energy draw shaves a little off its curve. The port manager leans closer. He does not speak. I do not speak either. We let the system fill the quiet with work. An hour later, the ledger has written a neat braid of reasons that a regulator would accept and a junior engineer could learn from. The manager nods once. He asks if we can highlight the explanations that mention weather so he can scan them faster on days when the sky is a liar. I mark the request and smile with my eyes. We can. The second pilot happens in a room that smells faintly of mint and dry paper. The cold chain distributor would like to know if the system can respect their strict temperature windows while still lowering fuel use. We set the constraints and open the map. Here the choreography is slower and more formal. Trucks become fine needles threading the same narrow lane again and again without losing the thread. When the ledger speaks, it sounds like a teacher who knows you will have to stand before someone strict and explain yourself in full sentences. I look up and catch the operations lead staring at the narrative pane with the expression of a person who has just found a long-lost receipt. He laughs once, a low single note. He says if I had this last winter, I would have kept my bonus. He says it lightly, but there is a truth under it that hurts and then heals. At noon, I sit outside with a sandwich and watch the sunlight climb the glass of a nearby tower. My phone vibrates with a burst of alerts. A business show has a loud conversation about Atlas X and the future of logistics. The ticker at the bottom of the screen says Arcturus delays attribution review for the current quarter. The letters are small. They slide by so fast it would be easy to miss them. I let the clip play without sound. The faces move like puppets pulled a little too far. I close the window and put the phone face down. The sun warms the back of my neck. There is a rule I learned long ago. If a wave looks eager to throw you, lean low and let it pass. The third pilot is a call with a trucking cooperative whose office walls are covered with photos of drivers smiling at dawn. The cooperative lead calls me by my first name and asks if we can be blunt. I say please. He says most of his teams do not trust systems that speak only in numbers. They want to know who gets credit when a risk was taken and the day was saved. He wants that story to be visible to the people who drove the miles, not only to a boss who signs next month's schedule. I tell him he is describing the reason I am in this work. We switch on the shadow run and watch a knot of traffic untie itself 3 minutes faster than the baseline. When the ledger explains the choice, it names the driver who provided the signal that changed the vote. It shows how that signal was used. The cooperative lead leans back and lets out a breath. He says if this keeps working, he will hang a screen in the driver lounge that shows these entries in a language that makes sense to tired people who do not want to be patronized. I tell him I will help him craft the words. By late afternoon, the inbox hums with questions. Do we need to reserve extra compute for the ledger? How does the system behave when the data center loses a rack? Can we export the narrative to our existing compliance portal? I draft careful replies and attach short notes where numbers are better than paragraphs. The council at Meridian asks for a quick summary to share with their chief. I write 3 lines. Performance held. Energy draw fell in 2 of 3 tests. Explanations were read and respected. Then I add the sentence that matters most. The client saw the chain of reasons as a tool and not a threat. A private message arrives from a colleague at the company I left. It pops up as a small bubble and then fades. Are you okay? It asks. Under that one sentence sits another message that does not appear in text but is easy to read. There is noise here. They are changing names in a document. I watch the bubble fade like a star that winks out behind a moving cloud. I type nothing. Silence is still the clearest way to say I am not available for that conversation. As evening folds itself over the water, I return home and set the Polaroid on the table. The little square looks awkward in the modern light. The map in the photo is messy and beautiful, like a first attempt that does not know yet how to perform. I take a picture of it with my phone and place the original back in the frame. I pour water into the bottle and drink. The dent catches the light again and makes a small white crescent you could almost mistake for a smile. I open my laptop and write a short memo for myself. Not for legal, not for Meridian, not for any future meeting. It is a note written to the person who will have to make choices when everything is loud. It says keep the pipeline that gives credit in place even when it is inconvenient. It says never allow an explanation to be rewritten after the fact without a mark. It says never rely on the stage when a ledger will do. I save the file and add a timestamp to the file name. Habit finds a path as water does. The night grows quiet. I stand by the window and watch a ship move across the bay like a sentence that knows where it is going. Somewhere in an office I left behind, a junior lawyer asks what a mirror log is and why it keeps sending drafts to a place no one remembers authorizing. Somewhere in a boardroom, a person with a perfect haircut uses the phrase brand risk twice in one breath. The bay does not care. The bay carries weight and salt and light from one side to another. It is carried worse and better than this. Before sleep, I open the console one more time. Colonel is running an overnight test with a mix of delayed trucks and volatile weather. The audit trail breathes and writes a line. I click the little marker and read the entry for my own quiet satisfaction. The monitor saw the same weather tremor that we saw in the room earlier. It switched to the backup model and recorded the reason and the time and the adjustment factor. It marked the event for review only if the condition persists into the next window. I close the console. On my phone, the news app pushes one more alert. A personality on a finance show has said a sentence with my old company name and the word turbulence in it. The alert glows for a moment and then fades when I touch the screen. I set the phone face down and turn off the light. The building breathes through the vents. The sea lifts and settles. In the dark, I tell myself the same simple line I have been saying for months. Build the system so that truth does not need a trumpet. Build the work so that a good choice leaves a mark anyone can trace. Then sleep takes the room with the soft authority of a tide that knows its way. The morning cracks open like a pane of glass that decides not to shatter. Heat lifts from the water and the gulls sound sharper. I set the kettle to sing and open my laptop to a wave of messages that arrive already out of breath. The subject lines are careful. The bodies are not. There is a short note from the Meridian Council. Please be available on Signal within the hour. There is a calendar block from their chief of operations with a title that reads only status and a pair of initials. There is a link from a journalist I met once at a small conference who never used adjectives when a plain noun would work. The link points to a mirror that was never meant to be public. I click and find a directory with a structure that looks like a closet with the door left open. The names are dry. Draft Attribution Policy. Decision Record Template. Architecture Decision Register. Log Rotation Guide. I open the register. Rows upon rows, date stamped in a clear hand, with fields for author, co-author, reviewers, approver, and decision. At first glance, it is all clean. Then a pattern emerges like a stain in a shirt when you tilt it toward the light. Authors in early entries carry names I recognize from the lab floor. Later entries migrate toward the executive floor. Reviewers fade to initials. Approver collapses to one name. My phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number that knows me well enough to be brief. Check line 38 and the version history. No signature, no avatar. I scroll. Line 38 shows a change 3 weeks before the launch. The field labeled Final Responsibility moves from a lead engineer to a 3-word title. The version history shows the change was made by a service account that runs at night. My kettle clicks and grows quiet. I read the log again with my elbows on the table and my breath held the way you hold it when a candle is trying to catch. The mirror has timestamps. The timestamps have a rhythm that does not match a human day. They match a cron job. The system pushed drafts at 2 in the morning every other Tuesday to a place where auditors could retrieve them. No badge swipe. No coffee breath. No hand on a mouse. A young lawyer somewhere must have watched this happen and asked the question that always sounds like a door hinge. Who turned this on? The answer is a shrug that carries a date older than the project. Someone put good plumbing in a bad house and forgot the valves do not lie. A new email lands from Meridian Council with a single line. Copy of publicly accessible register archived. Please save. I download the file and place it next to my own proofs. The folder looks like a small city scene from above. Streets run straight. Intersections hold their shape. It does not look like revenge. It looks like order. I step to the window while the coffee cools. Across the bay, the cranes blink in daylight and the ocean throws a handful of bright coins at the shore. Somewhere in the tower I left, a room is full of people who speak in low voices with sharp edges. I can almost hear the vocabulary from here. Brand risk, reputational exposure, legal posture, process exception. The words lean on one another like anxious relatives at a hospital elevator. My phone rings and the Meridian Council takes the line. Her voice is level in the way of a person who keeps a checklist next to her tea. She confirms the mirror is authentic. She confirms the pattern we noticed. She says their senior team will advise their board to proceed with caution and with speed. There will be a press statement soon, but not loud. It will say only that Meridian respects intellectual provenance and expects the same from partners. I tell her I agree with saying less than we could. She pauses and then asks me the question that matters to her client. Do you want to fight in the papers? I say no. I want a process that cannot be bent by a room full of hands. A message arrives while we speak. It is a screenshot from a chat inside the company I left. It shows a junior counsel asking why the mirror exists and a senior manager replying that it was a vestige of an old compliance exercise that no one had turned off. The junior replies with a single line that makes me laugh, not at them, but at the neatness of the knife. Maybe we should have left more things on. I spend the late morning with Colonel running a long test in the background while I read the register with the attention I save for things that will decide a year. The entries are not fireworks. They are small, steady lamps. Decision to fix event time at ingress rather than at transform. Decision to prefer majority but require a reasoned dissent summary when a minority model has historical advantage in a narrow weather band. Decision to throttle retrains during peak power cost Windows unless a safety trigger fires. These lines carry voices of people who do the work. Later the tone shifts to a distance that looks like an observation deck. Decision to align architecture with executive vision. Decision to consolidate authority for clarity. The register is not a villain. It is a mirror. A mirror can only hold what stands before it. Midday brings a meeting with Meridian Operations. The room jitters slightly as if the building has a nervous system. We speak through the plan for the next 2 weeks. Shadow traffic continues. 2 clients will allow live trials on quiet lanes if we pass a safety gate. I recommend more emphasis on the ledger interface and less on the map. If we win trust there, the map will feel like a picture frame for a photograph that already matters. The ops chief nods. He asks if we can add a button that flags an explanation for a Friday review. I say yes and write the small task into a list that is beginning to look like a long walk on an even road. In the afternoon, a news item breaks that does not call anyone a thief and does not praise anyone as a savior. It reports only that Arcturus has postponed its internal review of attribution for the quarter and that a special committee will examine the approval process used for key architecture decisions. The piece includes one fact that is a soft blow. The board has scheduled an executive session for the evening. The stock chart responds the way a stomach does when a boat decides to turn on a short wave. I put the chart away. Boats behave. Waves behave. Stomachs do what they must. I drink water and return to work. Midway through a notebook entry, I look up and see the Polaroid on the shelf. I take it down and set it next to the laptop. The old map is messy and honest. It is arrows drawn by a hand that had not yet learned how to draw arrows that look like arrows. I touch the date with the tip of my finger and remember the smell of warm dust when a fan pulls air over metal in a room that no one else has entered for hours. I remember thinking that if this ever saw light, I would have to stand in a room where someone smiled and called my work a team effort while slipping my name under a rug. I remember deciding to build a life where the rug would not be necessary. The phone blinks again. The name is Conrad. I let the call fall to the floor. A second call arrives with no name. It too goes where the first went. A message follows that uses a private email address I recognize. It says we should talk. It says we can find a way to honor the work and protect the company. It says we both know how narratives get built. I stare at the words as if they might grow a second layer of meaning. They do not. I delete the message and empty the trash. The habit of keeping records is not the habit of keeping ghosts. At dusk, I take a walk along the water. The tide is coming in and the rocks shine like seals. Families walk with paper bags from the food stalls and children invent games between lampposts. Somewhere in the high rooms, a board meeting begins with the click of a speakerphone and the shuffle of printed agendas. I sit on a bench and count the seconds between the gulls and the horns of ships. In my head, I draft the answer I will give if anyone asks what I want. I will say I want a lane in a contract that keeps the ledger alive even when people grow tired of reading it. I will say I want the pipeline that gives credit to stay visible when budgets shrink and tempers short. I will say I want the system to make it easier to tell the truth than to smooth it. The first stars arrive like careful commas. I walk home and check the console. Colonel hums in a voice I can translate without looking. The audit trail writes a line in pale gray and then rests. I open a fresh document and place 3 items at the top. Draft pilot report. Add Friday review flag. Prepare a summary on attribution as infrastructure written for humans who carry radios and manuals. I save the file with the date and a time. The folder looks like a calendar laid flat. A final alert crosses my screen just before I turn away. The board at Arcturus has appointed an interim committee to review governance. The notice uses words that never trend: prudence, oversight, alignment. It includes one other word that makes the back of my neck feel the kind of cool that is not from air: transition. I close the window and let the room return to the temperature of a lived evening. Before sleep, I stand at the sink and wash the bottle. The dent catches a drop and holds it like a lens. Through that tiny curve, the kitchen light bends into a small, bright stripe. I think of how a mirror can save you if you look when it tells you to look. I think of the service account that pushed drafts to a shelf no one had dusted. I think of the junior lawyer who asked the right question at the wrong time and found a door. I dry the bottle and set it on the rack. In bed, I listen for the building and the bay to agree on a rhythm. The night breathes. The system runs. Somewhere a room is scattering into smaller rooms as people step out to make private calls and say careful words to careful ears. Somewhere else a guard is rolling a cart down a hall that smells like paper and ink and thinking only of the end of his shift. My eyes close as if on a lesson that has decided to keep teaching while the lights are out. The last clear thought is simple. The truth does not need a crowd. It needs a path. The path is made of entries that explain themselves, and in the morning there will still be ships to move and lanes to choose and a ledger that will remember what we did when the water turned. The call comes while the afternoon light is still soft enough to forgive glass. My screen shows a private number from a city where boardrooms prefer carpets that swallow footsteps. I let it ring once more than polite and then answer. The voice on the line tries for warmth and lands on careful. He says his name as if he assumes I remember it. I do. Conrad asks for 15 minutes. I give him 10. We do not waste time on the launch or the articles. He suggests we talk about a path where everyone keeps their dignity and the public does not need to be invited. He says the company can amend records, issue a statement, settle a dispute before it becomes a headline that keeps walking. I look out the window at a gull balancing on a railing with the confidence of a tightrope walker who knows the rope is wide. I tell him I am listening. He paints a picture in which I return as a special architect with a title that fits on a brass plate. He says back pay can be arranged. He says the important thing is alignment and trust going forward. He does not say that trust is a word that cannot be stapled to a wall. I let him finish the paragraph. When he is done, I ask a single question. What changes in the system of credit and proof? There is a short silence that reveals he expected me to ask about money or a press line. He shifts his weight in the chair I cannot see and offers to create a committee that will review attribution. He says the committee can include technical leadership and legal. He proposes a cadence. He speaks like a man writing minutes while he talks. I say I am not asking for a committee. I am asking for infrastructure. I want a pipeline that records origin, revision, decision, dissent, and approval across every shared project. I want it to live where the code lives. I want it to publish its notes to a place no one can edit without leaving a mark. He tries to move the conversation to the human side. Surely we can work this out between reasonable people. Surely we do not need to let process replace discretion when discretion has served us well. I say discretion served someone well. He says the company is under pressure and that an ally on the inside could calm the waters. I say calm waters are not the same as deep ones. He asks if I can be flexible. I say I can be precise. Precision is a kind of kindness. The call ends with a promise to send a draft proposal. I thank him for the time. When the line goes quiet, the room seems to grow an inch taller. I write down 3 sentences from memory and save them to the day's notes. Then I open the ledger from the morning tests and read a few entries to remind myself what honesty looks like when it is written down without embroidery. A new block appears on my calendar from Meridian. Operations wants me on a call with their leadership and 2 board members. The subject line is brief: pilot status and conditions. I join from a quiet room where the air sounds like paper turning. Faces assemble in a grid. Introductions are quick. They want to hear what worked and what broke and what we will do next week. I begin with numbers. Throughput held. Median delay fell under stress in 2 of 3 cases. Energy draw dropped in 1 and held in 2. Then I moved to the part that made people lean closer. Explanations were clear enough to act on. No one felt talked down to by the machine. A board member asks for my view on risk. Not market risk. Not legal risk. Systemic risk. What would make me pull the plug mid-pilot? I answer without decoration. If the narrative stopped matching the behavior, if the ledger fell behind the decisions, if a model began to dominate and refuse tests, if the chain of reasons started to accumulate after the fact, the board member nods once as if a box on a private list just checked itself. The operations chief asks about scale. If this moves from 3 pilots to 10, where will it crack first? I tell him the first crack in most successful systems is not in the part that thinks. It is in the part that explains. People will ask for fewer words. People will say they are busy. People will say the ledger can be quiet until something goes wrong. That is when the rot begins. We will have to hold the line with design that makes explanation feel as natural as breathing. Short where short is enough. Detailed where detail is the only way to be fair. We agree on a next step that is both simple and large. 2 clients will allow live traffic on narrow lanes if we pass a safety gate and keep the ledger visible to their teams at all times. I add a small condition. I want every explanation flagged by a human to return with an answer by the next business day, either from the system or from us. The small promise prevents the slow erosion that ruins clean rivers and clean processes. They accept without debate. I make a note to build the review view for Fridays, the one the ops chief asked for. When the call ends, an email slides into view from Meridian Council. It is brief and formal. They intend to proceed with pilots and will issue a statement about respect for provenance as a shared value. They attach a first draft of a term sheet that would govern a deeper partnership. The lines are cautious. The numbers are placeholders. A clause near the end catches the light. Attribution services will be treated as essential infrastructure and funded as such. I read the sentence 3 times. It is a small stone that makes a large sound when it hits water. The room goes quiet for a while. I code. I review. I refactor a part of the ledger narrative that sometimes uses a long word where a short one can be just as exact. When I am finished, the sentences read like notes a good technician could explain to a tired driver without feeling superior. I push the change and watch a small wave of tests go green in the corner of the screen. Satisfaction is a soft sound when it comes from work that knows its size. Late afternoon. A short note arrives from a reporter who has been both fair and hard in the past. She asks for comment on an executive session at Arcturus and an internal review of governance. I reply with a single sentence. Northglass Analytics supports clear processes that record authorship and decisions and welcomes any move in that direction across the industry. She thanks me and writes back that she will quote the line if needed. I do not ask for advance copies. I do not ask for kindness. I do not need either. Near dusk, the phone lights with a number I do not know and a name I do. Helena Joe. We met years ago on a panel where she used small words to say difficult things and refused to be impressed by herself. She is not at Arcturus in my memory. She is at a firm that specializes in taking drifting ships and teaching them to follow charts again. Her message is spare. Would you take a call tomorrow? I write yes and send 2-time windows. She chooses the earlier one and adds a line. Subject will be provenance as infrastructure. I close my eyes and lean back. The room hums. In a corner of my head, a door opens on a hallway I have been drawing in pencil for months. If someone like Helena is stepping into this story, it is possible the plot will bend without breaking. It is possible we will build a lane that allows 3 entities to move together without grinding. It is possible the system I want will be welcomed not as penance, but as sense. I go for a walk to let the blood travel. The waterfront smells like grilled fish and diesel, and the kind of sugar that only street carts know how to cook. A child chases a paper plane that seems to know more about the wind than it should. I sit on a bench and watch the tide hit a step and then decide to climb it. A memory lands without being asked. A night when I stood at a whiteboard and drew arrows that could not stay straight and laughed because I knew I could make them behave if I was patient. The laughter that night sounded like a person who trusts time. Back home, I clean the kitchen with a care that looks like stalling and feels like order. I make tea. I stack papers. I line up pencils. Then I sit and write a letter I do not intend to send unless asked. It is a 1-page summary of the idea that has been carrying me since the day the first model told the second model it might be wrong. Provenance as infrastructure means the story of a system is built into the system. It means attribution is not ceremony but plumbing. It means no one can be asked to accept a decision that does not carry its reasons. It means credit is a property of the work, not a gift handed down by a generous manager. I save the letter and give it a name with the date and the hour. Habit can be a refuge when rooms are moving. On the console, kernel is quiet for once, a cat that has eaten and found a warm place to curl up. I open the Polaroid and stand it against a book. The old map makes the new maps look proud. I take a picture of the pair together just to see them in one frame. The message from Conrad arrives just as I am about to close the lid. It is longer than the last one and tries to sound like a man speaking across a campfire. He says he has spoken to counsel. He says the company can move on a set of gestures that show good faith. He says he believes in me as a builder and a leader and that he regrets the misunderstandings that have led us here. I read the words slowly and feel each one land with a soft thud. I reply with 5 lines. Thank you for the note. My requirements have not changed. I do not want apologies. I want a system that keeps us from needing apologies. If you wish to discuss architecture of process, I am available with counsel present. I sign with my first and last name and nothing else. The evening draws its curtain. I wash the bottle. The dent sits under the light and turns honest. I think about the drivers who will see their names on a ledger that shows the day they saved. I think about junior engineers who will read reasons and learn to argue well. I think about executives who will leave meetings knowing they have to fund the part of the system that tells the truth. I think about a call in the morning with someone who might help make the lane we need. Before bed, I open a fresh page and write 3 lines for tomorrow. Speak plainly. Ask for the lane to be mandatory. Keep the ledger human. I close the notebook and place it beside the laptop. Outside, the bay breathes out and then in. In another building, a printer warms and spits the first page of a packet titled Executive Session. The first sentence will include the word transition. The last will include next steps. Between those lines is a space where a better system can fit if the room allows it. I sleep with the window open just enough to hear the long horn of a ship turning. In the dream that finds me, I am walking through a warehouse where every crate has a tag that tells its story in a voice you can understand. I do not hurry. I do not steal. I follow the path the tags make. When I wake, the room is gray and kind. The clock says I have time to boil water before the call. The day says nothing at all. It only offers to be used well. Morning finds the room already awake. I brew water and set the bottle beside the laptop like a small silver anchor. The call with Helena is scheduled for an hour when the city is still making up its mind about traffic. I sit early and review my notes. 3 lines at the top of the page glow like runway lights. Speak plainly. Ask for the lane to be mandatory. Keep the ledger human. The screen fills with her face and a quiet background that could be a study or a war room that learned to smile. Helena greets me with a nod that wastes nothing. We trade short courtesies, and then she names the subject in 5 words. Provenance as infrastructure across alliances. The words land with the weight of something that is about to become a job description. She asks for my version first. I tell her what I have been telling myself at night when the console breathes in the corner. Attribution is not ceremony, it is plumbing. The pipe runs under every floor and through every wall. It carries origin and revision and dissent and approval. It does not go around power. It goes through it. It publishes a stream that people can read without asking for a key. If we get this right, then good faith has a home and bad faith is forced to wear a name badge. Helena listens without interruption. When I finish, she asks what I need from Arcturus and from Meridian if this is to be real. I answer with the calm of a person laying out a toolkit on a clean cloth. From Arcturus, I need access to the places where decisions are made so that the ledger can take notes at the source. I need a contract that keeps the pipe open when leadership changes. I need a clause that says no committee may ever relax the obligation to explain. From Meridian, I need a promise to fund the ledger as infrastructure, even when budgets are sore. I need engineers who will argue with me in daylight. I need operations leaders who will insist that explanations read like something a person who has just finished a shift can use. She asks what I want for Northglass and for Colonel. I want to keep ownership. I want to grant licenses that cannot be used to strip away the part that gives reasons. I want a seat at the table when process is designed so that checkpoints are more than a screenshot in a slide. I want the right to say no when someone tries to turn a lock into a ribbon. She smiles, not because the list is cute, but because it is short and exact. She tells me what she wants. She wants a truce that is more than silence. She wants to turn a crisis into a standard. She wants to teach a board to fund the thing that tells the truth. She wants to make room for the fact that a system can be right even when it is inconvenient. She says a board session last night used the word transition. She does not say who will be stepping aside. She does not need to. The shape of the room has already told me. She says an interim period demands stability, and that stability prefers contracts over handshakes. She asks if I will review a draft framework for a 3-way alliance. The subject line will say something that sounds like a dull textbook. It will hide the kind of deal that changes a habit across an industry. The document arrives while we still speak. I scan the outline while she waits. The first page sets the structure. Northglass retains ownership of kernel and provides licensed access. Meridian provides deployment and client management. Arcturus provides global operations and the kind of logistics spine that can hold up a city. The next page carries the clause I told myself to look for. Attribution pipeline as mandatory cross-party service. It lives in the same list as identity and billing. It is not a garnish. The clause is not just a sentence. It is a set of promises written in the language of systems. The ledger binds to source control events and to decision registers. It writes to an immutable store with read access for auditors named in the contract. It supports a human view and a regulator view and a workroom view. It marks any edit to an explanation with a reason and a signature. It keeps a copy in a place that no single party can silence. I read the lines and feel something in my chest relax like a rope that has been carrying more weight than it should. Helena asks for my reaction. I say it is close. I say I want one more nail in the frame. The pipe that carries credit cannot be turned off without a vote that carries more than a simple majority, and any vote to pause must include a public statement that says why and for how long. She nods and types a note that I can almost hear. She asks if I am ready to meet the operations lead at Arcturus, who has been asked to prepare for a new way of doing the work. I say yes. The second half of the call adds two faces to the screen. A woman who runs port strategy, and a man who looks like he knows what every server in a row is doing by the sound of its fan. The woman speaks first. She says the only way this will work is if the ledger takes no more energy to read than a shift briefing. She says if you make the explanations beg for attention, they will die in the field. I tell her we will design for mornings, and for Friday afternoons, and for the period after lunch when the brain slows. The man asks about the cost of the pipe. I tell him that cost is the wrong word. We treat it like the cost of brakes on a truck. That is not overhead. That is part of motion. We move through a set of hard questions. Who signs when two models argue and both have good reasons? Who writes the narrative when a rule changes and a judge asks why the past looks different than the present? Who keeps the keys for the store that cannot be silenced? We shape answers that are not perfect and not fragile. The keys are split. The rule changes are dated and explained in place. The tiebreakers require a reason that can be read next to the choice that brought them. I see the operations lead relax each time an answer lives in the system rather than on a poster. When the call ends, Helena says one last thing. She says a better system is a better story only if it is told by the work. She says my part in this is not to be the hero. My part is to be the person who refuses to let the pipe be considered optional. I tell her I can do that. Heroics bore me. Pipes do not. After the call, I step out into air that smells like bread and tide. I walk without a plan and let the city move around me. The sky holds itself in a soft blue, and the cranes look almost gentle. A child rides a small scooter with the confidence of a sea captain. Two dock workers argue in the easy rhythm of people who have earned the right to raise their voices without breaking anything important. I buy a soft roll from a stall and eat it while sitting on a low wall that is warm from the sun. When I return to my apartment, I open the draft again and read slowly, pencil in hand, as if it were paper. I make notes on words that can be shorter without losing force. I mark a place where we need to say that any dashboard that shows performance must also show provenance within one click. I flag a clause about internal investigations and ask for a line that says the ledger will provide first notice when a pattern of edits begins to look like a story rather than a history. A message comes from Meridian. Their board has approved the idea in principle. They are ready to move as soon as Arcturus names an interim leader who is willing to sign a term sheet with the clause we discussed. Minutes later, another alert arrives. Arcturus names an interim chief. The name is public and the language is sober. Conrad steps into an advisory role at a smaller venture. The board thanks him for years of service. The notice mentions a governance review that will continue under the interim team. It says little. It says enough. My phone lights again. It is a calendar invite from Helena. 3-way session to finalize the lane that will carry attribution. I accept. I pour water and sit with my back straight because the body remembers lessons that the mind sometimes ignores. I take out the old Polaroid and set it beside the laptop. The small photo looks like a younger voice trying to be brave. I tell it quietly that we are almost there. The meeting begins with careful faces that loosen by degrees when they realize we are not here to write slogans. We are here to build a thing that will carry weight. We walk through diagrams. We show flow between code and decisions and logs and views for humans. We touch the place where a driver might read her name. We touch the place where a regulator might read a paragraph and nod. We do not raise our voices. We listen when a question is asked in a tone that usually belongs to the end of a long day. Then we reach the slide that matters most to me, the one that is not really a slide. It is a picture of a pipe that runs under the whole drawing. I ask for the sentence to be read out loud so the room can hear it in air. The pipe may not be turned off for convenience. The pipe may not be narrowed to hide flow. The pipe will remember every hand that asked it to move faster or slower. The pipe will outlast any one of us if we do this right. Helena asks for a short pause. When we return, she says the board is prepared to sign on the condition that the first pilot include one lane where live traffic is visible to workers with no filter applied. The operations lead nods. I say yes. If people cannot see the reasons, then the reasons do not exist. We sign a memorandum that is not the final contract and not a press release. It is a map drawn clean enough to follow. When the call ends, I realize I have been holding my shoulders tight. I let them fall, and the room grows warmer by a degree. I set the bottle on the table with a soft sound that feels like the beginning of a habit becoming a tradition. Evening slips into the corners. I open Kernel and write a small note to myself in the repository. Today the world agreed to fund the part of the work that tells the truth. I commit the note with a timestamp. It is not code. It is a reminder that even code needs a reason to be proud. I sleep early. In the dream that finds me, I am standing under a ceiling of steel beams while water runs through a new pipe. It is clear and strong and honest. No one in the dream knows my name. They do not need to. They know where the valve is and how to listen for the sound of flow. I wake with a calm that I have not felt in months. The day outside looks like a deck washed clean. The announcement is set for a morning that looks polite. The bay is the color of soft coins, and the sky carries a thin veil that promises a careful sun. I dress in the kind of clothes that make you invisible behind a camera. I pack the laptop and a small notebook and the old Polaroid. I leave the bottle on the counter to dry. It will be there when I come home. The room for the announcement is not a ballroom and not a lab. It is a place where workers pass on their way to rooms that make decisions. Screens line the walls, not the kind that bully you with motion. The kind that hold still while you read. People take seats and stand along the sides and keep a respectful hum that feels like a dockside before a launch. Helena speaks first. She uses small words and leaves space around them so that they can be heard. She says the industry has been moving cargo and money and trust with systems that learned faster than our processes. She says today is about giving reasons the same engine we give roots. She names Meridian and Arcturus and Northglass as partners. She says the word partner as if it is a verb. The screens wake with a diagram that would look familiar to anyone who draws architecture for a living. Modules, flows, arrows that finally learn to be straight. Then a new layer fades in under the picture, like a foundation revealed under a polished floor. It is the attribution pipeline. You can see where code commits become decision trails. You can see where a dissent becomes a note that is not a complaint but a record of care. You can see where a driver's signal becomes a vote that leaves a mark anyone can read. A port manager speaks about the pilot where a morning storm forced a pair of lanes to switch roles. He points to the ledger view and shows the paragraph that made his team choose to trust a plan that looked strange for 6 minutes and then made sense for 6 hours. A cooperative lead appears from a driver lounge with a screen behind him. Names scroll as entries that credit the people who pulled days back from the edge. The screen is clear, and the font is kind. It reads like a thank you that is specific. A regulator from a regional office speaks in a tone that years of hearings have made steady. She says the narrative view looks like a form she can read without a translator. She says a case that took 3 months to explain last year will take 3 days this year if the pipe does what the test shows. She says public trust is easier to hold when you show your work. My part is small. I stand at the back where a column cuts the room and answer 2 questions off camera. One asks how hard it was to build the ledger. I say it was as hard as deciding to respect the people who must use it. The second asks how long I will stay in this arrangement. I say as long as the pipe is treated like brakes on a truck. I do not say more. Then comes the moment that feels like a hinge. The screen shows the architecture again, but this time the labels include names, not only of companies, of teams and leads and units that held the wrench and wrote the test and stayed late. The past is not perfect and the present is not pure, but the list is honest. At the edge of the room, I notice Conrad. He is not on the stage. He stands near a side door with a look that does not ask for sympathy. He nods when our eyes meet. It is a nod that admits a wind changed and that he is learning to sail in it or to build a smaller boat. I return the nod and let the moment pass. Some stories end with a door slamming. This one ends with a door held open while people choose which way to walk. The announcement closes with a short recital of dates and next steps. 2 live lanes start next week with full ledger visibility. A public repository will host the schema for the narrative view so that vendors can integrate without guessing. The attribution pipeline specification will be offered to a standards group that likes slow victories. The room exhales in one soft sound. After the crowd thins, I walk the corridor that leads to a window facing the cranes. I take the Polaroid from my bag and hold it up against the view. The old map looks like a child tracing the shape of a sea. I smile at it and put it away. I do not need the past to bless the present. The present is doing fine. I return home by way of the long sidewalk that follows the water. A boy throws bread to a bird that refuses bread and wants the thrill of the chase instead. A woman in a safety vest drinks from a cup and reads a message with her mouth set in a line that could be worry or concentration. A man in a suit answers his phone and laughs like someone who has remembered a name at the right moment. The city is busy being itself. I like it best that way. At my table, I open Kernel and read the overnight logs. The system has learned a small new habit. It has started to summarize, at the end of each long run, the 3 decisions that changed the day most. The summary reads like a note from a thoughtful colleague. I did not ask it to do this. I only gave it a place to write. I accept the gift and commit the change as a feature. Then I open a blank page and write a short letter to the future staff who will inherit this ledger when I am gone. Keep it visible. Keep it boring. Let it make you patient with one another. Evening comes with the color of cooked sugar on glass. I wash the bottle and hold it under the light. The dent is still there and will always be. I decide to buy a new one and to keep the old one on a shelf where it can remind me that not every mark is a flaw. Some are proofs. I set it down and smile. Before sleep, I stand at the window and look at the water that keeps its promises without telling anyone about them. The cranes lift and set down. The lights along the pier blink in a pattern that boats can read. Somewhere, a driver looks up at a screen in a lounge and finds her name under a decision that seemed small at the time and turned out not to be. Somewhere, an engineer opens a ledger entry and learns from a reason that was written for him by a system that refuses to hide its doubts. I close the laptop, and the room slides into the quiet that happens when a day used itself well. The plan for tomorrow fits on one line: begin work on Kernel 2 and keep the pipe clear. The space between those 2 tasks is the rest of a life if I want it. I turn off the light. The building breathes. The bay breathes. The story does not reach for a curtain call. It simply continues, the way good systems do, with clear entries and a path anyone can follow. The office is quiet in the way a library is quiet when it knows a good book is about to be written. Morning pours along the sill and settles into a warm stripe across my desk. I open a blank repository with a name that makes no promises. Kernel 2. The number looks small. The work behind it is not. I start where I always start. A note to the future. This build will explain itself from the first line. Every experiment will earn its date. Every reason will travel with its result. I save the note, and the editor gives it a tiny blue dot that means we have begun. The first commit is boring on purpose. A scaffold for tests. A place for the ledger to seat itself. A folder for stories that engineers can read without a dictionary. The second commit is a set of small functions that measure patience. They wait for the right window to test a change instead of throwing a rock into the river just to watch the splash. The third commit is not code. It is a single paragraph that says where we will stop if we forget what this is for. By noon, I have a map that only I could love. It is crooked and kind. The boxes are not perfectly aligned, and the arrows bend like the wind that lives on the bay. I take a picture with my phone and place it next to the old Polaroid. The 2 maps look like family. They share the same bones even if they stand differently. Messages arrive like small boats tapping a pier. A port manager sends a thank you that includes a photo of a whiteboard where a team circled a ledger entry and wrote good call above it in thick blue marker. A driver writes to say she printed a paragraph and taped it to her locker because it was the first time a system spoke to her in a voice that did not pretend. An analyst attaches a chart that looks like a low hill becoming lower. He says it is not a miracle. He says that is the best part. In the afternoon, I meet the operations lead from Arcturus on a call that feels less like a meeting and more like 2 mechanics leaning over a warm engine. We walk through the first live lanes. We look at a corner where the narrative is still longer than a person wants when the radio is busy. We promise to shorten it without letting it get lazy. She says she will bring 2 supervisors into the next review because she wants them to see the pipe so they will believe in it. I tell her that is the right order. Show, then ask. Helena sends a brief note from a room where the lights always look like morning. She says a standards group has asked for a first draft of the schema for narrative views. She asks if we can write it as if the world were tired and wanted to get this right the first time. I reply with a simple yes. Then I add a line. We will make it readable to a person who has been on their feet all day and does not like being lectured. Twilight gathers and the cranes turn into black handwriting against a pale sky. I close my eyes and listen to the building breathe through vents that sound like soft bells. Kernel 2 does not need me to watch every second. It knows how to wake me if a voice changes in the wrong way. I lay a hand flat on the desk and think about the pipe under the drawing. It is a simple shape. It carries a simple promise. Reasons will travel. Credit will leave a trace. Doubt will be allowed to speak in daylight. I open a fresh page and write 3 lines for next week. Draft the schema and invite rude questions. Add a summary for long runs that reads like a dispatch and not a poem. Visit the driver lounge with the cooperative lead and listen before answering. I close the page, and the room returns to the quiet that good work makes when it is not trying to perform. Night leans in with the smell of salt and iron. I wash the old bottle and set it on the shelf above the desk. A new bottle waits on the counter. The old one holds a dent that will never leave. It looks like a witness. It looks like a lesson. It looks like a promise kept. Sleep comes the way a tide comes when the moon is calm. In the drift between waking and rest, I see a warehouse lit by a soft row of lamps. Crates sit in long lines, and every crate has a tag that tells its story in a voice anyone could read. No one argues. No one steals. People pick up the right box and carry it along a path that is marked by reasons instead of orders. I do not need to say my name in that room. The room does not need it. When I wake before dawn, the window holds a thin line of silver. The city is getting ready to be itself again. I brew water and sit. Somewhere a driver turns a key and checks a screen. Somewhere a junior engineer opens a ledger and learns why a vote moved when it moved. Somewhere a manager reads a paragraph that tells the truth without shouting. The pipe under all of it carries what matters. The work continues. The story does not ask for applause. It asks for clarity. It asks for care. It asks for a small courage that comes every day and does not wear a cape. I finish my cup and open the editor. The cursor blinks like a steady pulse. I start to type.